Hello everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Domenico Manente, and
Vamos a empezar. Soy Domenico Manente.
Of the second day of the ESPD conference. This workshop will focus on adapted physical education and the role of sports and physical activities as a way to support inclusion of persons with disabilities. And also we will address the role of support service provider in facilitating inclusion in sports. As a speaker, today we have Christoph Krimbuker-Beckerle from the University of Graz. Before giving the floor to Christoph, I just remind you that we have closed caption available. Just click on the button, and we have also interpretation in Spanish. I think we can now start. Christoph, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Domenico, and hello, everybody. It's nice to host a workshop on the topic of sport, physical education, and inclusive education and inclusion. It's really important that ESP highlights these topics because the importance of sports and in inclusive education is very huge, but they're not so it's not so common when
que no se debate muy a menudo.
Providers, so therefore I will give some theoretical inputs and some best practice examples, and afterwards we have some time for to share your experience and some question and answers. Yeah, before we start, I would just like to introduce myself. The family name, it's not so easy in German, and in English it's Krimbuker-Beckerle, but Christoph is more easier, and in English it's easy as well. As Domenico said, I'm from the University of Graz. I'm a sports scientist on the one hand, and on the other hand, I worked for an association in which we offer inclusive opportunities for children with and without disabilities in sport and cultural activities. In this experience, we worked for kindergartens and for schools and provided them external support, how they could adapt physical education, how they can adopt sport in schools and kindergartens. I have some 5 topics we want to talk about it today. The first one is the positive aspects of sport and physical education. Then we would narrow it down to inclusion. So how can physical education and sport be adapted that everyone can take part? Next to it, we jump a little bit further and see if there are other sport and physical activity opportunities at school besides physical education, the so-called extracurricular physical education. And at the end, I will try to reach the gap to the role of social service providers, which is very crucial when thinking of inclusive education, also in sports and physical education, and therefore it is important to address this issue as well. And then there is room for your experience for a discussion on the topic. Before we start, let me quickly recap the morning energizer. I don't know if any one of you joined, and if there are still some questions on the morning energizer. For those who not joined in the morning, I was asked by ESPD to do some activity, some workout in the morning, and therefore I teamed up with those athletes you see on the picture from Special Olympics to do some workout, some mobilization, some stretching, and it was really fun to do it with them, and I hope you, those who joined, did also had some fun with us in the morning. If there is any comments on that, then please let me know. You could also comment on this afterwards when there is time. So, but Domenico, you have the chat, and if someone is okay, perfect, good. Why I bring the importance of physical activity in the morning, in the evening, whenever you have time, is because sport and physical activity has some positive effects. You all know that regular physical activity and doing sports has effects on the physical health and the psychosocial well-being. But it's not always clear what regular physical activity means, and therefore I brought an extraction of the WHO guidelines. They recommend physical activity. For example, here on the right side, you see the slides for children. So for children, regular physical activity means, or to have positive effects on health and other issues, means that they have to do 60 minutes a day physical activity, so every day for 60 minutes at least. Of course, more is always welcomed, and at least 3 days they should do high intensity exercises on these days. The reason I brought up the WHO guidelines is this, because in 2020, for the first time, also the topic of persons with disabilities is addressed for the first time. So before it was not addressed in the guidelines, and therefore it's important. For the first time it is addressed, people with disabilities, and the importance of sport and physical activity. Yeah, besides physical health effects and in psychosocial well-being, there are also effects on learning and concentration. For example, if we have a morning energizer in the beginning, as we had today, then we could also use the energy for the rest of the day. And there are studies who are suggesting that regular physical activity leads to a more focused mind, to more concentration throughout the day. And this is also important when we work with people with disabilities, also with intellectual disabilities, because the focus, the concentration might lack at some point, and therefore sport is very important. And when we go from the originally sport to sport in physical education, I have to say that physical education, so sport in schools, has something which is different than, for example, the other classes or the other subjects. If you see on the left side, for example, the picture of students who are being physically active, and on the right side, a student doing his exercises with the assistants. So basically the structure of sports, on the one side, the facilities, the gym hall compared to regular classroom, and on the other side, how we could easily adapt physical activities and plays is a main advantage when we think about inclusion in sports and physical education. Yeah, although to come to this point that sport is socially inclusive, we have to overcome a paradox situation, because on the originality, sport is based on competition, sport is based on physicalness, sport is based on rivalry, on winning, on losing. So these aspects of sports are in the pure form not as inclusive as it looks like. But as I said earlier, sport offers a lot of possibilities, especially the social components of sports, doing exercises together, building a team, etc., etc. And the opportunities in a gym hall are important and are easier to have it to make it inclusive than, for example, other mainstream subjects in school. Although sport is highly inclusive, I have to admit, and also experiences from the practice show that there are still social disadvantages when we have a look on physical education in schools. For example, I brought some examples that it's still the case. I mean, I have to say there are good examples where social inclusion in sports and physical education is done very well and properly, but still there are some examples in which it's not working as good as it could be, let's say like this. And I brought some examples. What also could happen, that is that therapy lessons of children with disabilities are, instead of physical education, it is sometimes the case, or can be the case, that children with disabilities have to watch other children play and be the spectators. And it could also be the case that, for example, children with disabilities have to do other alternative activities like going for a walk or something like this. And it was the case earlier, for example, in some parts, that children with disabilities do not have to attend sport and physical education, so they had to leave school earlier, or if the lessons are in the beginning, they could come later. So these are crucial parts when designing lessons in sport and physical education, which can be overcome. But we have to do a little bit modification, because I think sport and physical education of all subjects in school have the highest opportunities to be inclusive. But to make it inclusive, one has to make some modification. And that brings me to the term of adapted physical education, which means how to design sport and physical education that everyone can take part, irrespective of a disability. And basically, there are 4 parts or four topics which can be modified. They're all shown on this picture on the right side. And there are, for example, equipment, rules, environment, and instruction. When we have a look at the equipment, that means, for example, we use this ball on this side. This is a goal ball. It is a ball which contains some sound in it, another word in English. There's a sound ball, let's say like this, and it has some holes that everyone can grasp it easier. So it's easier for people with hearing impairments, for example, or for people with deficit in motor skills. The rules is another part we can, for example, adapt or modify. This is, for example, in this picture, that everyone has to sit like this, or that other kids have to go down, or that everyone, for example, will have to wear those masks to get the same situation for everyone. Environment means, for example, the light in the gym hall, or it could also mean you can see the marks on the bottom of this picture, where we can put some marks that can be seen or even touched by, for example, students or children with seeing impairments. And maybe one of the most crucial part in the modification is the instruction part, is the part of the teacher. That means that the exercises should be instructed that everyone can understand it, either people with intellectual disabilities to understand it in easy language, or other people in, for example, sign language, etc., etc. And this brings me also to the point that the person, the teacher, the teacher's role in adapted physical education or in inclusive sports is really crucial, because with a positive attitude of the teacher, it is very much possible. Whereas when the teacher is not open for inclusion or for adaptation of sports, it is not a good predictor. Let's say it like this. I brought some models who are basically mentioned in this modification process. There is this practical model of tree I mentioned at the first model. For example, tree is an acronym and means teaching style, rules, environment, and equipment. We already had rules, environment, and equipment in the basic feature on the slide before. In here, the teaching style, what I tried to address earlier, is a key issue to make sure that everyone can take part in sports and physical education. And the benefit, or why I bring these practical models, how to adapt sport and physical education, is that there are good issues or practical examples on the homepage where you can have a closer look. When I click on this link, for example, you see here the Sports Australia homepage, where they show a lot of, at the very end, a lot of sport ability cards or activity cards, in which you have a lot of practical exercises and sport and activities, and it is also shown how it can be adapted. When we, for example, click here at the beanbag challenge and click on that, you see a lot of exercises with a beanbag, for example. This is such a small bag filled with rice or similar product. And you can use this, for example, for balancing. You can use this for throwing in the air. You can use this alone, or you can use this with another one together. And all those activity cards give first an example of the exercises, and then at the bottom they give the modification options in teaching style, in rules and equipment, and in environment. So you have a lot of activity cards here who could help you to address the topic and how to modify easy exercises that everyone can take part. Next to the model of tree, there's a similar model also coming from Australia, which is called Change It. Here the origin is more from sports club and from coaching. It's not specifically for schools and for physical education, but it highlights other aspects, for example, how to score or how the playing area is. So it should be, one should be, make sure that, for example, one can modify the scoring activities, but this could also be have disadvantages if, for example, you say the student or the kid with disabilities, his or her goal scores twice and the other one score once. So you have to also make sure that this is that these experiences are also in a social manner that not bring some disadvantages when trying to bring people with disabilities in sports, for example. What is other than the other models is that it has two parts. The inclusion part, it means that if you have teams, they should always be containing of some with and without disabilities. And it has a very important part, the time part, which means that everyone has his or her own rhythm and should be and should be left for his rhythm, and this time part should be also used when designing exercises, when working with an inclusive group. The last model is, as far as I'm concerned, more from the United Kingdom part and has another different tradition, but basically it's the same modification opportunities. Why I bring it here is because the framework of the STEP model was used in the last year also for doing workouts at home during the Corona pandemic. So this is a model coming or used for how to adapt sport for people with disabilities, but with its benefits, it could also be used how we can adapt sports from the gym hall to our home, to our office, etc., and make sure that everyone can take part. Yeah, to sum this up, I said before already that the role of teachers is crucial in designing inclusive opportunities in sport and also in all other subjects, because research showed that teachers with a positive attitude to inclusion, they designed lessons more diverse, they gave more time to practice, and also they set higher expectations for all students. So, but not only the students which are high achievable, for example, so they had higher expectations to every student. And as we heard before, the modification is an important part. Teachers who had a positive attitude for inclusion or to inclusion did more modifications of those options I told you earlier. We had now a focus on sports as physical education, which is seen on the left side, and there is also sport in associations, in clubs, and I will now talk a little bit about the things they are standing in between, the so-called extracurricular physical education. That means sport is not only done in physical education. Sport in schools can also be done in school breaks, for example, or in the afternoon. Nowadays, there are more and more schools who are lasting the whole day. So the all-day schools, and therefore we can also have some sport groups in this with the open opportunities in the afternoon. There is a lot of room for doing sports and doing inclusive sports as well. And finally, what is my focus are the school sport events. And I will now talk about school sport events. I brought some example of school sport events like sport weeks in summer or winter, sport days like swimming, go for a swim with the class for one day, do some excursions, do field trips, for example, go in the woods, go somewhere else. And there are some sport festivals, and there could be some competitive events as well. Because, or due to the fact that competitive events might be the one who are, these are the one who, where social inclusion might be might be very difficult. I want to address this issue at the next slide. So competitive school sport events, not only for children without disabilities, but for children with and without disabilities. I want to mention one initiative from Austria. This is the Initiative for Sport and Inclusion called BISI, and they offer specific school sport events for children with and without disabilities. Since already 15 years, they had more than 150 sport events, and in this 15,000 students or children take part, and a third of them had intellectual disabilities. So they design sport events like this that everyone can take part. And when having a look at we did some interviews with the participants and with the teachers, and all of them said that they see it very positive, the events. But there is one but, as always, well, mostly, These events are kind of exclusive events because they're only foreseen for classes with an integration part. So for classes where a kid with intellectual or physical disability take part. So for other classes where there's no one with disabilities, this is not foreseen. There are other mainstream events in Austria, for example, and those two initiatives are not as good connected as possible as it is, for example, the case in the United Kingdom. And I brought a video from the United Kingdom about the school games, and I want to show how they do perform the school games in the United Kingdom.
The National Disability Sports Organisations.
Most schools do have individuals with disabilities in, and it's very, very important to be inclusive with them and for them to be fully involved in sports.
I think it's very important that people realise and understand the role of the National Disability Sports Organisation.
There is 8 national disability sport organisations working with specific impairment groups to encourage participation in sport. We can offer our expertise, we have educational resources.
NDSOs can offer support, advice and guidance to schools around how to make their offer inclusive.
Working out the inclusion agenda is one of the challenges of the school games. We've got to have kids involved in sport in schools, and the school games is the vehicle. But it's got to be the right competition and events for the young people. It's about making it easy for schools, making it easy for STOs to access what they want to know, to get the answers and work together.
Some of the teachers seem to be put off by disability sport and think of it as a scary thing to do, and they're scared of not doing the right thing, whereas it's very easy to become inclusive by just doing 1 or 2 things.
There's some great practice out there where we can connect people together.
We're trying to encourage partnership working so that schools can work together to provide outstanding opportunities for young people. It's helped us develop the networking links that we have with different community providers. We've been able to send on contact details for established community groups, people that we potentially didn't know that were out there.
Sport's important to me because I want to do well when I leave school, and I want to try and improve my skills and just have fun in my life, really.
It makes me really, really happy and get really shocked myself.
Makes me feel amazing and happy too.
We do work with a lot of special schools, but we also work with a lot of mainstream schools, because we find when pupils are in mainstream schools, they're not necessarily given the opportunities. So through competition, through the school games and other regional to national events, but also to try and find them some suitable clubs that they can link to help develop their skills.
In general, with our kids, I think a lot of them struggle with those social skills and the personal skills, and I think sport can really help them with that.
The schools can ask about what other local opportunities are there to their school that they can signpost their kid to and know that they'll get a strong sporting experience.
Organisations like the National Disability Sports Organisations are keen to engage with as many partners as possible to ensure that child not only enjoys their physical activity of sport, but actually the social side that sport can bring.
You do meet new people, become more confident in yourself. Nothing's impossible. Or you can always do it, no matter your disability, no matter how you feel, you can always do sport.
Find out more about the National Disability Sports Organisations and resources to support inclusive sport in your school.
Yeah, this was a kind of best practice example from the United Kingdom, as I said, where the school games itself, the school games for everyone, has a topic or a specific focus on inclusion. And I couldn't bring it in a theoretical presentation, so I guess the arguments from the kids, these are very, very important to see the role of sports and the role in terms of social inclusion. I guess I have 2 slides left in my presentation, and now I want to jump to the role of social service providers. I talked before about the role of teachers and the role of modification, but I would say that inclusive education in sports and physical education is not possible in mainstream school without the help of school assistants. So school assistants and service providers have a crucial role, if you ask me. And for example, also when it gets to those school sport events, for example, we did an investigation where we asked parents of children with different kind of disabilities and asked if they can take part in ordinary school sport events, like being off for a week in skiing or being off for a week in summer. And it seems to be that the role that they take part is mainly based on the school assistants and the role of the parents. Still, there are some issues which are not addressed so far, like financial issues, financial resources, and also insurance. For example, when being a week off from school, what can the school assistants do? What can the carer do? So there's still something to do in this case to ensure that children with disabilities can take part in every activity which is offered at mainstream schools. And when bringing the gap from schools to social service providers itself, I would say that social service providers have for their own also an educational function. So they should also make sure to offer a lot of sport and physical activity opportunities. We did an investigation with social care workers who are working with people with intellectual disabilities and asked them about their own physical activity behavior and doing sports and what they would recommend for people with disabilities. And interestingly, they were all very active, the people who took part in our investigation, but they recommended a lower amount of sport and physical activity for people with intellectual disabilities. And this is very important. I already highlighted the WHO guidelines, and for adults, irrespective of disability or not, they suggest to do at least 150 minutes per week. So you should get active in moderate activities 2.5 hours a week. And in our study, it showed that, for example, the social care workers did suggest a lower amount than those 150, or half of them did suggest a lower amount than those 150 minutes per week for people with intellectual disabilities. So it is very important that the role of sport and physical activity is incorporated in social service providers as well, on the one side as assistants in school, but on the other side also for those people who are working in the facilities. Yeah, I now finished my monologue. It's a little bit strange to talk in his presentation or in the screen. So I would just now invite you to share your experience, to share what you've found out so far. What are your barriers in trying to conduct sport and physical activity, physical education, or just to share some good practices from your work and from your experiences. So I then stop my presentation so far, and maybe I give the voice to Domenico. Or
thank you very much, Christoph, for the nice presentation, very practical. Yes, we can open the question and answer session now. If there are comments or feedback or questions from the audience, you can type it in the chat.
I've seen that you posted the link in this presentation. That's good and very helpful. Yeah. Thanks. I also had some links on the presentation slides at the very end, and also the references I used in my presentation, because there was a question I've seen about the reference so far. Yeah.
Yes, there is a question about the reference. If you could then share the link, and then another question. Is in your experience, how has COVID made a change to adaptive physical education?
I don't know if I'm the expert on this so far. I guess you could also, the person who asked this question is more an expert on this because he has done research on this field, but I just tried to give a short answer on this, because I would say that has a huge impact, but a negative impact on adapted physical education, because at least I can speak for Austria. At the very first beginning of the COVID pandemic, school opportunities was not so easy for people with disabilities. So they could not take part in the very beginning, and so they could also not take part in schools and not in sports. It might be the same in other countries, but in Austria it is the case that the sport facilities were closed for everyone, so irrespective of if you have a disability or not. And this was also a huge topic for physical education, for example, because it was not so easy to make. So let's say like this, teachers had to be very creative because sport was not possible in the sports hall as they use it. So they had to go outside, and with a smaller group, for example, they had to adapt sports, as we say it like this, to go outside from the gym hall in a park, for example. So these are, for example, very positive aspects to adapt it, but I fear that there are negative aspects on this reduction of sports in the last year, especially also for children with disabilities. As far as I'm concerned, I have some studies who show, for example, that the development of kids in physical activity and, for example, in body mass index was going down in the last year during Corona pandemic, for example, and I presume that this is the case also for children with disabilities as well. But maybe I don't know if the Kwok who asked the question has some more input on this topic itself. I don't know.
Yes, indeed. Kwok, please feel free to comment and add more inputs.
Yeah. Hi. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi. Okay. Thanks. No. First of all, just like to thank Christoph for this presentation. I think it's really good to have this in this platform, at this forum. I think too many things happen in special education and they forget about physical education, and that's a really real big problem in terms of how we kind of address the whole inclusion aspect and the whole special education area. So it's really good to see this topic is brought up at this level, and it will be good to kind of keep this type of topic available as well, and not separate physical education as a separate entity from inclusion education. So really, thank you for putting this in a program, and really good to see that this is happening. And I think the presentation was excellent. But in terms of the COVID-19 aspect, yeah, we did a little bit of research. We asked some teachers in some countries across Europe how they were doing things, but of course the pandemic has changed so much over the time, and some countries still had school closures, some countries didn't. So one country I don't think we got data from was from Austria. So that's one of the reasons why I was kind of asking about that. I think it's been challenging for many of the teachers to work remotely, irrespective of whether it was adaptive PE or just PE or just even teaching. I think a lot of the teachers weren't prepared for that. But I think PE, physical education, had more complications because we were so used to being in like a sports hall, that's our classroom, and to convert that to a computer screen was you have to be very creative to do that successfully. And then there's a complication even further of then, as mentioned, with the possible complications of, you know, the different adaptations, you know, with this tree model, you know, the teaching styles. How do you interact with, let's say you've got 5 different pupils, students, children, depending on what term you want to use. How would you cater for different teaching styles when there's only one of you there and you're responding to 5 on the screen? At least in a sports hall, you can let them do an activity, and then you watch them and give them a different task maybe, or get another student to help and things like that. There's lots of ways that we've trained the PE teachers to do this in a face-to-face environment, but in a virtual environment, in a remote environment, I don't think we've done that very well. So that was actually one of the focuses on our paper, was to identify this need, this technological need. And on the other hand, it's also been really good to get some people to address going beyond the occupational therapy, the therapist side of their activities for some pupils, students, children with who would normally have some of their cumulative minutes of physical activity through the therapist, because then they were in a safer environment, and they would, if it was arranged to have a one-to-one online, that they could then do that and not have to look at the potential barriers of getting from your house into a bus, into a physical space, to then do your 1 hour therapy session and then get back on another bus and then go back to the school or to the home. So this was given that opportunity to do that, but again, it depended on the country and it depended on the systems. So yeah, I mean, that's, I think, you know, some of the highlights of what we experienced with the COVID-19. I mean, I'll be interested to hear if anybody else had seen or had heard or experienced any other types of experiences, because you know, some of the schools are partially opened. In Finland, where I live, the children who went to the special schools, who went to, if you listen to the panel yesterday, the person who's in the World Bank, she's from Finland, so she's worked in special education. So we do have a hybrid of going from special schools, special classes into general schools, that there were still some of the children with identified needs, learning needs, that they, irrespective of the other schools being shut down, they still were able to go to school and still get the support that they needed. But I suppose our infection rates have been really low percentage-wise compared with the rest of Europe. So it would be interesting to hear how it was in other countries as well, because I don't think this is going away very quickly, you know, at all. I think we've got to prepare at least another academic year, and then we've got to deal with the consequences of, you know, this reduction of BMI. So is that because of lower muscle mass? Does that then, or does that actually mean that, you know, that they've actually improved their obesity levels? I don't know, you know, we've got to look into that more.
Thank you very much for your contribution and your views. If others have comments to add what was said about the impact of COVID, or if you have resources or examples, practical examples of how did you cope with the pandemic, linked, of course, to the adapted physical education, please feel free to make your comment now, or you can always contact Christoph or the other participants later on. I have one question for Christoph. Yeah, thank you, Kwok. You put in a link to a page with the resources that they are trying to collect. Thank you very much for that. A question I have for Christoph is what are the source of knowledge that you think are the most important and most useful for those coaches that want to create inclusive conditions? I saw that you maybe already you mentioned some, but do you have other important resources or knowledge that you want to share?
Yeah, thanks, Domenico. I would say in these times, the resources are very good on the internet. As Kwok already mentioned, the resources or the European Federation of Adapted Physical Activity, which is a good resource of this. I also had in my presentation, I don't know if I can share my link, my screen again. I have some useful practical links as well, where the adaptation through the models has been shown, the tree, the chain sheet, and step model. There is also a good practice resource called the Inclusion Club, which brings all the topics we had today, for example, sport, physical activity, and inclusion together, and lets people say what they did about in this section. And also, as I said, the first address point in Europe is the European Federation of Adapted Physical Activity. I would say that this is very, very important in this case. But more important, especially when we have a look at the COVID pandemic and the situation right now, is to get an exchange with other teachers, with coaches, that they get an exchange about how to adopt, about how they make it. This is very crucial. It's not so easy in these times when we all sit, when we cannot meet the opposite, but this would be, as I said, the education part, to be constantly educated and search for further training, either online resources or training on, for example, on doing a trainer school for disabilities. As far as I know, also the OIFAPA has a course for students, or I guess a master course or a bachelor course on how to adapt physical education, how to make it more inclusive, how to have the importance of sports in this topic. So there are a lot of options in this sections. And if you ask me, I would search for the exchange with other professionals, and also, I mean, if you don't have so much experience, often in practical, teachers come and say, hey, what can I do? What exactly can I do? And then I said, okay, it's try to do, you have your knowledge in sports, for example, or inclusion, try easily go and try and do a trial error stuff. So try to modify opportunities, the games, try to use another ball, for example, try to modify. And these are things physical education teachers are used to that, how to design plays and how to design sport activities. So I would say that this is, one should only remind them to do this. And as well, maybe one last part is to get also the experience of social service providers in this case, because they are the experts for inclusion, for disabilities, and they should take a crucial part, as well as the children itself. So give the children a voice that they will tell you if they are able to climb. I had an example, for example, there is a negative example in this case. A colleague of mine has a daughter she has to use a wheelchair, for example, and in private she used to climb, for example, she goes climbing, but in schools they won't take her to climbing because they presume that she is not able to climb, for example, that there are some restrictions, and those restrictions can only be handled if we all work together. So the students, the teachers, and the social service providers. That's resume it like that, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christoph. Any other question? Well, then I have maybe the last one. Christoph, what are, according to your experience, the biggest challenges about coaching or general providing inclusive opportunities to people with disabilities? How did you cope with these challenges?
Basically, I would say when we speak about the mainstream sports, in sport clubs, for example, a huge challenge is the sensibilization. For example, coaches never had experiences with, for example, children with intellectual disabilities, like Down syndrome, for example, or autism or stuff. So there is a lot of room for improvement for sensibilization in this part. And also, if someone, for example, let's stay with the example of Down syndrome, it's not easy for him or her to go to a sport club and say, hello, here I am, I want to take part. So it's not organized sport is not yet so far that it's possible. So there has to be a lot of exchange between sport clubs, between facilities, between social service providers, as I said before, to make this possible. Just a quick answer on this question, maybe. And as Kwok mentioned before, so there's also transport, and there are a lot of issues one has to overcome. And maybe one last point is that sometimes it is separated. There's the ordinary sports. There's sports for people with disabilities. I would say it's very important for ordinary sport clubs also to speak out the invitation that everyone is welcomed, and to try to use the experiences in this part to make sport. The sport has the opportunities to be highly inclusive, as I tried to mention in my presentation, but make it also open for everyone to take part, irrespective of a disability, irrespective where someone comes from, irrespective of other social disadvantages.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christoph. Any more questions from the audience? No, I don't think so. So we can close the workshop here. Thank you very much for joining. Please remember to join us tomorrow at 9:30 tomorrow morning for the final day of ESPD conference. We will be hosting 3 panels looking at lifelong training of persons with disabilities, the training of social services staff, as well as the policy framework needed to promote inclusive education. Thank you very much again to Christoph as speaker and all the participants, and have a nice afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.